Today at 6, we've seen the fighters. Now the Taliban's leaders arrive in Afghanistan and say they're ready to take control. In the capital, Kabul, the big question, is this a new Taliban or will they govern with the brutality of the last time they were in charge?
I reassure all internationals, the UN, all embassies, our neighbours, that we will not be allowing the soil of Afghanistan to be used against anybody.
But thousands of Afghans are taking no chances, whatever the Taliban say. They're waiting to be evacuated.
Clearly, there is a dynamic political situation running across the city. We make no assumptions about that, other than that we really can't afford to pause and wait.
So how many Afghan refugees will Britain take? How many should we take? Also tonight. Rebuilding after the pandemic. The latest official figures show record job vacancies as the UK economy rebounds. The plague is still a killer in parts of the world. Now a new vaccine developed here could consign it to history once and for all. A glimpse of deep space as we've never seen it before. Astronomers learn more about the birth and destruction of the stars.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, England captain Joe Root admits his side need to get better following their final day defeat to India at Lord's as they look for a way back in the series.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. 20 years after being driven out of Afghanistan, the Taliban leadership is back in the country they once ruled with such brutality. In their first public statements on Afghan soil, the Taliban say their territory will no longer be used to export terror. Remember, that was the reason the international coalition invaded the country after the 9/11 attacks on America. There were assurances too that those who worked for international forces would come to no harm and that women would be allowed to study and work within Islamic principles. Here's our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette.
The Republic has fallen. Its leaders fled. Taliban rule is returning. Day by day, its fighters more visible on the streets of Kabul, patrolling with US military vehicles left behind or lost by government forces, taking on tasks to show they're in charge now and showing the new face of Afghanistan to the world. Today, the first press conference by a man who's long been a mystery, Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid, showing his face in public for the first time, making their message clear.
There is death in war. We didn't kill for revenge. It just happened because it was war. We were fighting. We have given amnesty to everybody. We want them to give us forgiveness.
And a message for anxious Afghan women too.
There will be nothing against women in our ruling. Our people accept our women are Muslims. They accept Islamic rules. If they continue to live according to Sharia, we will be happy. They will be happy.
Day by day, Afghans come to terms with the Taliban again, waiting not for words, but what will change in their lives.
Let's see what Afghanistan brings. I want to stay here. I want to fight for my students. I want to fight for our vision of Afghanistan. And I know things are never going to be the same anymore. It's just, I have to be here.
And so far, some surprises. Female presenters are still fronting popular news programs, a Talib taking her questions. But many fear it's just a shiny new show for now. Women are already taking to the streets. We exist, they shout. Work, education, political participation is our right. Women make up half of Afghan society. Don't upset us, they tell the Taliban. Be our voice. With fighting finished, time for fun too, Taliban style. Not the usual image of austere Islamists, but it may be but a brief pause before new rules come into force. Look at just one snapshot of how many people, Afghans and foreigners, are fleeing as fast as possible. The evacuation from Kabul airport proceeds ever more urgently, including Britain's operations.
There was bound to be a moment of turmoil in that system. I think actually what's really impressive is that in a very, very short period, we've moved forward now into something that looks stable and that we can continue to move on.
The Taliban are promising stability too, and a government that's different this time round. Their words have changed. Many wait to see what they really mean.
And that was Lise Doucette reporting for us there. Now, despite the assurances we heard from the Taliban today, many thousands of Afghans are desperate to leave the country. Today, the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, said the government here would bring forward plans for a resettlement scheme for refugees in due course. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
This is the push to get people out. Hundreds of troops are helping evacuate British nationals and Afghans who help foreign forces. But not everyone's eligible for a place on these planes, and those left behind may try to make their own way out. That's what Masood, which is not his real name, did. 3 years ago, just 16, he fled Afghanistan when the Taliban threatened his family. He said the illegal route was his only option, travelling on foot, in lorries and with people smugglers.
I couldn't talk because they had their guns and their sticks. You can't talk with them, they'll just beat you.
So how do you feel now, with your family are still in Afghanistan?
I don't have contact with my mom, with my sister.
You don't know where they are?
I don't know, and when I see the news every day, bomb blast, Taliban, this, that, fight, I'm very scared, you know what happened, are they alive or not?
With more refugees now expected, the government's promised a plan to help.
We'll be looking at a bespoke arrangement. We're a big-hearted nation, and we've always, as I know from my own history, as Pretty knows from hers, always been a country that's provided safe haven for those fleeing persecution.
This is fresh in many minds, the influx of refugees from Syria that became a political point of tension. Some 20,000 were settled in the UK. A similar scheme's expected for Afghanistan. There's no detail yet. Other countries have pledged to take thousands, and there's pressure here to come up with a fair, controlled system.
Is there a plan, is there a strategy for safe and legal routes for refugees to come out of Afghanistan, and how quickly can that be put in place?
We need to show leadership, and what I'm asking Boris Johnson to do is to recognise that we need to have a generosity of spirit. We need to make it clear that those that are vulnerable will have a welcome here.
We should open our doors. We need a reset of our foreign policy when it comes to migration, and I hope we'll hear that tomorrow.
Tomorrow, Parliament's been called back from its summer break. The Prime Minister's expected to set out more detail of his plan.
The government says its immediate focus is evacuating British nationals and eligible Afghans, then setting up a system for refugees. Boris Johnson wants to convene a meeting of world leaders. The Foreign Secretary's talked about extra humanitarian aid. But ministers acknowledge they were caught out by the pace of events in Afghanistan. Now there is a sense of having to scramble to respond.
With so much at stake for so many, there are few simple solutions at this point, though plenty are looking to the government for some answers. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, around the world, the dizzying speed with which the Taliban have retaken Afghanistan is being blamed on President Joe Biden's decision to withdraw US troops so quickly. Last night, the president defended his policy, arguing that he didn't want any more Americans to die in a war that Afghan forces themselves were not willing to fight. Well, our North America editor, John Sopel, is in Washington. I mean, effectively, John, he's kind of shifting the blame, blaming the Afghans. Is that, how's that going to go down?
Yeah, the speech last night said, echoing Harry Truman, a former American president, saying the buck stops here. Except it should have been really, the buck would stop here if I'd done anything wrong, but I haven't. And he blamed the Afghan military, he blamed Afghan politicians, he blamed Donald Trump for all that has gone wrong in the past. I think what's been striking today is the extent to which the American leadership are trying to put themselves on the front foot by saying, look at all we are doing. We've got hourly flights coming out of Afghanistan. We have got 4,000 troops patrolling the Afghan air base. We're going to get 7,000 to 9,000 people out of Afghanistan in the course of the coming days. So that is what America is trying to do. But Joe Biden went to the American people promising empathy, promising competence. On empathy, you'd have to say it was a pretty hard-hearted message that he delivered yesterday to the Afghans who've helped America over these past 20 years. And as for competence, I mean, even the most die-hard supporter of Joe Biden would struggle to say that this has been anything other than chaotic. He likes to say America is back. But back how exactly? And that is a big question after these past chaotic few days.
All right, John, thanks very much. Now, the scenes of chaos in Kabul have posed many difficult questions for British veterans of the Afghan war and their families. They sacrificed so much, but what did those 20 years achieve? 454 British military personnel and defence staff died over the course of the war in Afghanistan. Some veterans' charities say they're providing additional mental health support to help ex-service personnel process the events of the last week. Our home editor, Mark Easton, reports now from Royal Wootton Bassett.
This is the town that bowed its head to honour the fallen of Afghanistan. Hundreds of those killed in the conflict were driven through Royal Wootton Bassett from RAF Lynham, the last repatriation exactly 10 years ago tomorrow, a moment to be marked by a church service, an anniversary made more poignant by the events in Kabul. The local vicar is in touch with veterans and their families, trying to reconcile the human sacrifice with the chaotic scenes on their televisions.
The service is the same, whichever the war or the conflict. And I would never say to anyone in that situation that their service and duty was wasted.
Some people are saying it wasn't worth it.
The Christian faith says to me, there's no greater service than to lay down your life for your friends.
Many didn't think Jack Cummings would survive the war in Afghanistan. After losing both his legs, the bomb disposal specialist astonished doctors by not only recovering, but competing at the Invictus Games.
It looks like Jack Cummings is going to get on the medal podium, and he does! 55.22, Jack Cummings takes the bronze.
But it was a subdued Jack I met at his home. The Foreign Secretary has said his actions were not for nothing, but he's struggling right now.
I've been knocked away, I've been blown for six, it's totally hit me, just everything that's happening in Afghanistan, and this is just what, was it for nothing?
Was it for nothing?
Unfortunately, my own personal opinion, I think it was.
I veer between moments of huge anger and tears, to be quite honest. Tears in particular.
That despair is also felt by Major General Charlie Herbert, who commanded forces in Afghanistan.
Trillions of dollars have been invested into this campaign. Thousands of coalition lives. And to throw that away, I mean, this is an abject humiliation of the West.
In Royal Wootton Bassett, I met the Help for Heroes psychologist, currently inundated with calls from veterans of the Afghan campaign.
There's going to be a lot of wondering around, what was the purpose? For us at Help for Heroes, the important thing for us is to continue to support our veterans and their families, to demonstrate that actually there is a continuing need.
Veterans of Afghanistan know withdrawal was always part of the end game. But to walk away with the mission in tatters, to abandon those who were promised security and peace, that's why some people are hanging their heads in Royal Wootton Bassett today. Mark Easton, BBC News, Royal Wootton.
Well, let's return to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's in Dubai. Lise, going back to your report just now, lots of assurances from the Taliban, but I guess the big question, what are they worth?
Not a lot. They can't be worth very much when the reality of Taliban rule in the 90s is still very much seared in memory. And also that the reports that we've been getting, persistent reports, when Taliban overran districts across rural areas of Afghanistan, that once they were in charge, the reality on the ground wasn't that different from the 1990s. The general pattern was that girls weren't going to school, and when they did, it was up to age 6. dozens of media centres, and especially those where there were women journalists, were completely shut down. Men were told to grow long beards. Music was banned. What's happened in Kabul in recent days is quite different. Female presenters on air, women reporters in the streets, this calm, reassuring press conference. But it's still early days, and Afghans will be wary, but they know these are their new rulers.
Lise, like you in capitals around the world, London, New York, in Washington, diplomats are going to be also listening to what the Taliban are saying. How do you think they should react?
Well, they're going to have to roll back a bit, aren't they? Because for many months now, they've been warning the Taliban that a military victory would not be acceptable, that they warned them that they would be a pariah state if they come to power militarily and establish a pure Islamic system. And yet one of the strongest messages from this press conference was a strong Islamic system, Islamic values. And they've never made that clear under questioning when there's been a whole parade of diplomats going to the Gulf state of Qatar to try to find out, what do you really mean? Afghans have been asking those questions too. So now it's a reality. The Taliban are back in power, and every neighbour, near neighbour, and countries as far away as Britain are going to have to find a way to deal with the Taliban. There's lots of tough talk now, but the Taliban believe they've won a war against the world's mightiest armies. They're going to have rule the second time pretty much on their terms.
All right, Lise, thanks very much. Here, there are more signs today of the way in which the UK economy is rebounding after the worst of the pandemic. The number of job vacancies stood at a record 1 million in the 3 months to July. That's according to official figures. Much of the growth in jobs is in sectors previously hit hard during the lockdown, such as entertainment and hospitality. As our economics editor Faisal Islam reports, wages in those sectors are rising.
In Kent, the fruits of economic recovery from the pandemic. A huge backlog of building work, demand through the roof, but Spencer can't find the workers to fix them.
Definitely a major shortage of personnel. It's across the board. Labourers, bricklayers, carpenters, plasterers.
How many applicants are you getting?
To these work?
Yeah.
To this? None.
None?
None.
Well, you're putting your job adverts up and nobody is applying?
Not at all, no one.
Today's jobs numbers show joblessness at 4.7%, down again in the 3 months to June, well below its pandemic peak last autumn. Vacancies have never been higher, at 953,000 in the quarter, or over 1 million in the single month of July. Though by the end of June, the latest figures show there were 1.9 million jobs still on furlough. A record in the number of jobs vacancies reflects what's going on not just in construction, but across the economy, especially those sectors that are newly reopened, such as restaurants and pubs and hotels. It also reflects good news in the jobs market, lower unemployment than expected, the number of jobs nearly back up to where they were before the pandemic. But the issue around labour shortages is now a very real challenge for the recovery. On the streets of Tonbridge, the high street is returning to life, but not quite as normal. These vacancy notices, signs of our times, as employers struggle to keep up with demand returning, but without the same number of workers, after a combination of the pandemic and new post-Brexit restrictions on European workers.
I think it's a perfect storm of lots of things. So, we've had a pandemic, people have not been moving jobs, so people have been kind of sticking where they are. So you've got a lack of candidate movement. You've got a lot of EU workers that went home during the pandemic, and actually it's really difficult to get back if you want to. And the skill shortages, you're going back to a lack of apprenticeships from a long time ago that haven't been coming through. And it almost the pandemic, I think, has accelerated a problem that was already underlying.
For now, not all the vacancies match where the jobless are, nor their skills. But for those workers with in-demand skills, such as here in construction, wages are starting to rise. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
And the time is 19 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. The Taliban patrols the streets of Kabul as its political leaders attempt to reassure the international community. And coming up, Britain's regulators say Moderna's COVID vaccine is safe for 12 to 17-year-olds. Could it soon be approved for use?
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, a cracking opener for the snooker world champion Mark Selby to look forward to. The jester from Leicester, as he's known, returns to his hometown for the British Open to face a familiar foe.
It was a disease that ravaged Europe and Asia centuries ago, but the plague is still an infectious and often fatal illness. Now scientists in Oxford have begun trials of a new vaccine against plague. 40 volunteers will receive the vaccine, which is designed by the same labs that created the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID jab. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, reports.
Protection from an ancient killer, a vaccine against plague. Larissa is one of the first volunteers to receive it as part of a trial in Oxford which will assess the vaccine's safety and whether it induces a good immune response.
I'm lucky enough to live in a time where vaccines are being developed, and so when I saw that there was a study aiming at developing a vaccine against the disease that's been around for 2,000 years and that killed millions and millions of people, and so I just thought I would do my bit.
Plague is caused by bacteria found in fleas and rodents and can be spread by humans whose lungs have been infected. The deadliest pandemic in history, the Black Death in the 14th century, killed around 50 million people, half of Europe's population. Plague is thankfully now rare and treatable with antibiotics, but an outbreak in Madagascar in 2017 killed around 200 people. And there are cases each year in rural parts of Africa and the United States. Current vaccines are only partially effective, so if the Oxford jab works, it could help protect vulnerable communities.
There's no danger that the vaccine stored in this freezer can cause plague. It contains just a tiny amount of its genetic material, which has been inserted into a disabled common cold virus, the same virus that's been used to create the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine.
We've already done clinical trials using similar technology against a bacterium, meningitis B, and a virus, Zika, but we're also looking to develop vaccines against new and emerging diseases such as Lassa fever or the Marburg virus.
If the plague study goes well, then scientists aim to conduct further vaccine trials in Africa in the hope of curbing one of the biggest killers in history. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, Oxford.
Now, for coronavirus, the latest government figures show there were 26,852 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 29,564 new cases per day in the past week. 6,303 people are currently in hospital with the virus. 170 deaths were recorded in the past 24 hours, and there was an average of 93 deaths a day in the past week. 89.6% of adults in the UK have now had their first jab, and over 77% have had both jabs. Now, meanwhile, Britain's medical regulator, the MHRA, has said that it's safe to give the Moderna vaccine to 12 and 17-year-olds. Until now, only Pfizer has been given that clearance. It now goes to the expert vaccine committee to decide on the next step. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, is with me. Before we look at that vaccine here, I'd just like to go back to those figures I was reading out. What do you make of them?
Well, George, that figure of 170 daily reported deaths is the highest since the middle of March. We should remember, though, that's a very sad figure for families involved. It does reflect cases which were first reported in mid to late July, 4 weeks or so ago. And back then, the number of daily reported cases was above 40,000. It's now come down to between 20 and 30,000 and seems to have settled there. So the big surge or new wave of infections, which some were predicting, just hasn't happened. But the cases still remain relatively, certainly higher than this time last year, and certainly a reminder that the virus is still out there. We should also note that daily reported cases on a Tuesday can be higher because of delays reporting over the weekend.
All right, well, let's go back now to that Moderna vaccine and its clearance for use for young teenagers. I suppose the question is, does that mean it's more likely that they are actually going to be given or offered to school children?
Well, not necessarily. Certainly the medical regulator, the MHRA, says it's safe to give the Moderna jab, along with the Pfizer, to between 12 and 15-year-olds. But the decision as to whether to actually do it is down to ministers in the different nations of the UK, and they'll take advice from the expert committee, the JCVI. They will have to look at a whole range of different issues. Now, at the moment, 12 to 15-year-olds who have a serious health condition or who are living with somebody who's immunosuppressed are eligible to get a vaccine. It's possible that group might be widened, but the big decision whether to roll it out to all 12-year-olds and older, that may take a few more months.
All right, Hugh, thanks very much. A tropical storm is severely hampering efforts to help the survivors of Saturday's powerful earthquake in Haiti. Heavy rain and high winds overnight brought even worse conditions for the many thousands forced into temporary shelters by the quake. The UN estimates that more than 500,000 children now have limited access to shelter, safe water and food. New Zealand's Prime Minister has announced a nationwide lockdown after its first COVID case for 6 months was reported. The country has only vaccinated around a fifth of its adult population. Alcohol deaths in Scotland have hit their highest level for more than a decade. Figures from the National Records of Scotland show an increase of 17% in 2020. Scotland's Public Health Minister said lockdown had led to heavy drinkers consuming even more alcohol. Bob Dylan is being sued by a woman who says the singer sexually abused her in 1965 in a New York hotel when she was 12. Her case alleges the star provided her with alcohol and drugs, sexually abused her and multiple times, and used threats of physical violence. Dylan's spokesman said the claim is untrue and will be vigorously defended. Astronomers have captured some of the most detailed images ever seen of galaxies in deep space. They reveal their inner workings in unprecedented detail and show the role of black holes in creating as well as destroying stars and planets. Here's our science correspondent, Palab Ghosh.
Our Sun is just one among 100 billion stars in the Milky Way, which in turn is one of countless other galaxies in our universe. Astronomers have now found a way to see inside them in much greater detail. In this image, the galaxy is in the middle. Shooting out either side are jets of material across the expanse of space as a result of a gigantic black hole inside it.
These jets shoot out just like a fountain of water, far, far beyond the reaches of the galaxy itself. I walked around with a huge smile on my face for the rest of the day because I felt so proud that I was able to make this image and be able to see something nobody had ever seen before.
It's just one of several new pictures obtained with the help of these aerials planted in a small field in Hampshire. These pick up radio waves from the galaxies. They may not look like much, but astronomers have connected 52 sites just like this one, spread all across Europe. Astronomers can now see things they've never been able to see before. This is a picture of a galaxy seen through a normal telescope, and here is a standard radio image of it. Although it's a lot brighter, a lot of the detail has been lost. Now compare it with one of the new high-definition images, which is much sharper, showing features inside in unprecedented detail.
In tonight's sport,
the brightest area at the bottom shows the location of a gigantic black hole inside this galaxy. It's bright because of the energy released as it sucks in material around it. This image shows two galaxies colliding. The bright spots are clusters of exploding stars, creating what astronomers call a galactic wind, blowing dust and gas away from it. And this is a galaxy created early on in the life of the universe, and it too has a black hole, causing jets of material to spurt out.
Even seasoned astronomers say wow at these pictures. It's become very clear that in order to understand galaxy evolution, we need to understand the black hole right at the very centre, because it appears to have a fairly fundamental influence on how a galaxy evolves.
These new images will help astronomers learn more about how the processes that created stars, galaxies and our own Earth actually work. Palab Ghosh, BBC News, Chilbolton Observatory in Hampshire.
Well, let's come back to humble earth and the weather here. Here's Darren Bett.
Thank you, George. It's been a day of contrasting fortunes today. A little bit more summer, like in Scotland with some sunshine. Temperatures 23 degrees, but in Kent it was various shades of grey and temperatures 16 degrees in the afternoon. I know of one person that was lighting a fire this afternoon. It was so cold. Yes, it is the latter stages of August and we still have this cloud covering most areas overnight. It'll lower onto the hills, a bit of drizzle here and there, and temperatures underneath that blanket 12 to 14 degrees. Bit of rain coming into the Northern Isles, slipping into northern parts of mainland Scotland. The rest of Scotland, though, should see the cloud breaking with some sunny spells developing again. We've got more cloud elsewhere. That cloud tending to lift. It becomes less gloomy. It should tend to brighten up in many places, a hint of sunshine as well. And so as a result, we've got temperatures more widely up to a reasonable 20 or 21 Celsius. Now I'm going to skip through the next couple of days. So this is the story for Thursday. We've got some patchy light rain coming into Northern Ireland, Wales, western parts of England on the weather front. Ahead of that, a lot of dry weather around, still a lot of cloud, so temperatures struggling up to around 17 to 21 Celsius. Moving quickly on to Friday, another weather front coming in from the Atlantic, bringing rain mainly this time towards Northern Ireland. The odd shower possible ahead of that. Maybe a little brighter skies developing across parts of England and Wales, giving temperatures a boost up to 23 degrees. First half of the weekend, though, could get very much warmer across parts of the Midlands, in particular the southeast of England. Temperatures could reach 26 degrees in the sunshine, but it's going to be short-lived because that warmth is coming ahead of that rain. That rain develops more widely overnight and into Sunday across England and Wales, and it could be heavy and thundery. George.
Many thanks, Darren. And that's all from the BBC's News at 6, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are.